Let us therefore call the 7/14th meeting of the Washington County Solid Waste Planning Committee to order. 5:32 p.m. Apologies for the late start. We'll make that up, I promise you. Maybe not in this lifetime. Eventually. Welcome to everyone, members of the committee and members of the public. Appreciate you being here this evening. Would note that there are some extra agendas and some other handouts available at the desk as you enter the room, including a sign-in, so if you wouldn't mind signing in and help yourself to the materials that are available there. Also help yourself to food and beverage in the back of the room. And note that there are bathrooms out the main door here and down the hall to the left. So I think that covers the housekeeping for this evening. A review and approval of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda as presented? If not, is someone willing to move approval of the agenda? So moved by Mike. Support. Frank, any further discussion? If not, all in favor of the agenda as presented, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The agenda is approved. Public comment is the next item on the agenda, but before opening it up to public comment, I would like to offer an opening statement this evening. So I appreciate a couple minutes of your time. So before beginning the first public comment period this evening, I would like to exercise my role as chair of the Solid Waste Committee to offer a few comments. We are getting close to having a complete draft plan ready for formal comment and review. And I believe it is in everyone's interest to have the clock start on the formal review of the completed draft plan as soon as reasonably possible. We have heard many concerns in the past several months, particularly from the community around the Arbor Hills landfill, including issues around odor, dust, noise, traffic, and the overall health and safety of the surrounding community. I can assure you that the committee has listened carefully to these comments, concerns, and critiques. As you all know, Advanced Disposal has withdrawn their request for a landfill expansion at this time. The amended plan will not include the siting of a new or expanded landfill in Washtenaw County, but will provide direction on the process for solid waste facility siting if and when such a request occurs in the future. The committee will be discussing these siting criteria at today's meeting. Also, since our last meeting, a fire at the Arbor Hills Materials Recovery Facility, or MRF, operated by Great Lakes Recycling, has caused serious damage to that facility. The fire at the facility has raised additional safety concerns by the community living and working near Arbor Hills. These Solid Waste Planning Committee meetings provide an opportunity for the public to voice their concerns. In addition to a discussion of siting criteria at today's meeting, we are also hoping to discuss how the plan can be effectively implemented. Once the draft plan has been completed, the plan will be available for public review for 90 days. All written comments received during this period will be documented, and amendments to the draft plan will be considered by the committee in light of these received comments. Once the public comment period is completed and the committee approves the final plan, the document will be sent to the County Board of Public Works and Board of Commissioners for their approval as well, along with Washtenaws local communities and the state of Michigan that will authorize the final approval. Members of the public are encouraged to offer their comments during these meetings, during the public comment periods, as well as during the formal draft plan comment period. I would ask that all of the speakers this evening be respectful of this committee and of one another's time in speaking to issues and concerns that may have not been otherwise raised in the past. The first public comment period is reserved for those speaking to siting or plan implementation issues that are on today's agenda. The second public comment period can cover other related topics. Please approach the podium at the appropriate time, Identify yourself and limit your comments to no more than 3 minutes. And please remember that the public comment period is not a question and answer session. So out of deference for the committee members and the process, please do not endeavor to engage the committee in conversation during these times. Committee members, county staff, and the consultant are generally available before and after meetings for informal conversation. I ask all of us to aspire to our nation's highest ideals in seeking a public process that enlightens, engages, and informs in a respectful and empathetic way. Thank you. So with that, and if everyone is now not entirely intimidated by the prospect of getting up and speaking before this body, would like to open it up for the first public comment period. Please.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. I appreciate the opportunity. My name is Matt Wilk. I'm the treasurer of the Northville Public Schools Board of Education. And I appreciate the task that you have. My meetings are 3 to 4 hours, and I realize you guys are mostly volunteers like we are, and you have a difficult task before you. I want to talk specifically to put on your radar a question of process, because I know those are things that are near and dear to our hearts. You'll hear from all the people here about this particulars about, I want to talk particularly one about process. I think you are aware by now that the boundaries of Northville Public Schools is broader than Northville. It includes portions of both Oakland and Washtenaw County, and in particular, areas around the Arbor Hills Waste Dump. So if a student lives in that area, they attend Northville Public Schools. I am acutely aware that the state law does not require that we be included as a municipality or a local body of government to be included in these sort of conversations. I also know that that is not a prohibition, that you can, if you want to, solicit our comment specifically and receive that comment as you would from any of your other members. And that's what I ask of you folks, process-wise. We have, as you know, at the nearby elementary school, we have about 500 students. That's a lot of families that are impacted. We get a lot of questions and unfortunately don't have a lot of answers because we don't have a seat at your table. And that's a seat for purposes of reviewing the plan, talking about its impact, and then giving you the input of a very particularized group of impacted individuals. That is, students that are near enough to be able to smell, hear, etc. the dump. So what I would ask of you is a couple things. If you were so inclined and you wanted to expand your committee, a member of our board would be happy to join either on an ad hoc basis, as we do with DEAs and other groups, a liaison, or if you wanted to make it more formal and add us to the portion of where we would be inclined. We had an election, we're reassigning committees at this point, we're putting people into different positions, and this would be one that interests a lot of us. And we'd like to ask for you guys to at least consider that when you're having the discussion of the plan. At the least, I would like somebody within this group to have that information forwarded to us, because we are a local unit of government, we are impacted, it includes our district. So that way, when you guys are prepared for public comment on your formal plan, we can review it through our committee and board process and come back to you with something that speaks on behalf of the entire Board of Education instead of my comments here today. As you all know, I'm sure you're aware, the board passed a resolution in opposition to the expansion of Arbor Hills. It sounds like that's not currently on the table. The lady who runs the group had a nice public presentation where she said it will be in the future, and we want to make sure that our continued opposition to that expansion is noted and is reflected in the plan. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for hearing us tonight. I'm Marjorie Banner, treasurer of Northville Township, and I have 7 notes that I would like to read into the record as suggestions for items to be included in your updated Washtenaw County Solid Waste Management Plan. Number 1, as Mr. Wilk just spoke to you of, the addition of Northville Public Schools as a member of your committee. Number 2, to name Northville Public Schools as a unit of government in the approval process as Salem school children attend Northville Public Schools. Our township is in full support of their efforts. Number 3, that waste hauler permits should be issued by the plan administrator. That costs to cover administrative fees as they were in Genesee County. We've noted it on this flyer that we just gave to you. That permit to be revoked if haulers do not drive on designated roadways. There would be an exception for haulers collecting trash within a 2-mile radius. Permits in adjacent counties like Wayne to be issued by appropriate authorities at the recommendation of the plan administrator. The Washtenaw County Solid Waste Plan demonstrates a minimum 10-year capacity for waste disposal in Washtenaw County. We believe, therefore, siting or expansion criteria and procedures should not be established. Number 5, we suggest to place a surcharge on haulers for each truckload to pay for road maintenance and improvement. Number 6, that no new or expanded landfill shall be located within 2 miles of the nearest residential neighborhood, school, or public park or facility. And number 7, that Arbor Hills landfill, as noted, is a 337-acre municipal type 2 solid waste landfill located in northeast Washtenaw County at the site mentioned. Its size should be limited to 337 acres. Those are our suggestions for inclusion in your plan, and we appreciate it if you take those under consideration. Thank you.
Hopefully this doesn't look like double teaming. I'm Fred Chadco, Northville Township trustee. We have been knowing that siting was going to be on the agenda today. We have been going through the 1999 plan and have some suggestions for modifications and additions to the siting criteria. And a copy is being passed out here. Number 1, no new or expanded landfill should be located within 2 miles of the nearest residential neighborhood, school, or public park or facility that existed at the time the application was filed. Number 2, to quote from the 1999 plan, the selected system does not allow for the siting of any new landfills or incinerators within the county, and that needs to be carried over into 2016. Also, in the 1999 plan, number 3, sanitary landfills shall be specifically excluded from this plan. Number 4, any landfill expansion or siting of a new landfill must preserve and protect identified wetlands and endangered species. Replacement of wetlands to make room for a landfill is not permitted. Number 5, based on some recent history here, any expanded or new sanitary landfill must have functioning fire hydrants as specified by the National Fire Protection Association on the property. The hydrants' operation shall not be dependent on the site's electric power supply. This is brought about in part because of what we experienced in Northville Township with the recent fire. Salem Township came and got 1 million gallons of water from our fire hydrants and Plymouth Township fire hydrants to fight the fire with. They did not have fire suppression at the facility. And we sent them a bill. It's a lot of water. There is a long list on page 3-39 under minimum standard siting criteria of items. I won't read you all of the bits and pieces, but in some of them we are suggesting that distances be increased from 1,000 to 10,000 feet. Number 7, in addition to the 1999 requirements for membership on a facility siting committee, those requirements should be extended to your committee, SWPC. Approximate municipalities and school systems to be included can be in any county, not just Washtenaw County. And the highest elected body of any municipality or public school district within 2 miles of a sanitary landfill's operations shall be able to veto siting of the facility with a simple majority vote. And finally, 8th, also a quote from your existing 1999 plan, solid waste management plans need to be developed and implemented with due regard for both local conditions and the state and federal regulatory framework for protecting public health and the quality of the air, water, and land in the entire surrounding communities, including adjacent communities in Wayne County. Thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Tracy Birkenhauer. I'm here from Stop Arbor Hills. As are, I believe, the majority of the audience here. I don't know if there are many people here who are not from Stop Arbor Hills. I believe you're all with us. I'm very disappointed to hear that you are indeed including siting criteria for a new or expanded landfill in Washtenaw County. In fact, I can't believe it. Because this means that you will expedite the process when advanced disposal comes back. And it's my understanding advanced disposal has not withdrawn their request. They have paused it. When Kelly Rooney met with us very brazenly on October 24th and insisted that yes, indeed, they have full intention of siting a new landfill, she said, we've invested in the infrastructure. We've invested in this property. Why wouldn't we expand? Of course we're expanding. She's looking at a room filled with people who are being polluted by this landfill, who are being horribly, deeply affected by it, and there's no regard for that whatsoever. And now I feel the same from this committee, and I really can't believe it. I'm in utter shock right now. I just can't believe it. And I hope that some of you vote your conscience. I know there are a few of you on this committee who are good, honest people who truly do care about these matters that we've been bringing to you for almost a year now. And I pray that when it comes time to vote, that you will listen to us, that someone will listen to our voices. Thank you.
Hi, George Todorescu. I'm a Northville resident, also with Stop Arbor Hills. I moved into Northville in 2015. Just a couple of comments. 2 years, not a single week without odor, dust, traffic issues due to the landfill. Not 1 week. The accountability of the firm that is running the landfill has been dreadful. And I need to ask you all to put yourself in our shoes as a resident nearby, and would you like to see what's happening there in your house, in your community, before you vote on the measure? Like Tracy, I'm just beside myself that we would even consider a single bit of work that would expand their operation, given their dreadful performance today. In my professional life, I run a $500 million plus budget operation. Anyone who performed the way they have, whether it's Republic or any other name they use, because they like to bandy about who's responsible, would have been discharged a long time ago. Their performance is dreadful. The problem is the people that feel it are the most underrepresented, and that's us. We live by it, we see it every single day. It is a nightmare without end. I have stopped investment in my home. I know I will never see those dollars again. It is a really, really serious issue. I appeal to you to think long and hard of what the folks who are living near the landfill and in what should be a booming, beautiful community are going through, and what it means to the investment in that area of Metro Detroit if you proceed to allow any chance of expansion. The conversation should be, how do we shut it down, not grow it? Thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak at this time?
My name is Roland Wong. I'm the Secretary of the Northville Public Schools Board of Education, and I spoke at your last meeting. I offer you a written copy of the resolution that was passed unanimously 7-0 by the school board at the meeting. I referenced it, but I didn't have a copy, so I can present it to you. And I know you've already heard a lot of public comment, but I just wanted to mention that StopArborHills.com, the group, had a meeting with Larry Bean, who's the DEQ representative, and he talked about all of the complaints, the 70 complaints, the visits to the site, Arbor Hills site, and his personal encounters with noxious odors and smells. And so I think that that is just part of the record in terms of the track record that Arbor Hills, Republic, and Advance exhibit. And so I think that that is substantive information that should be considered in any proposal for enlargement of that landfill. I mean, I think the record should speak for itself. So, thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak at this public comment? Seeing no one, we will call that public comment period closed and move on to item 4 of the agenda, review and approval of the minutes of our November 9th, 2016 meeting. Is someone willing to move approval? Nancy? Okay. Discussion. Seeing no comments, all in favor of the motion to approve the minutes of November 9th, please signify by saying aye.
Can I interrupt?
Oh,
I'm sorry I'm delayed in my request for comment.
yes.
I would like a little discussion about committee members and who they are. Because I know there's been some confusion about John Ford, whether he is still an alternate, and how many general public representatives we have. So I would like some clarification. Andrew Berkey was reclassified at some point in the past. I don't think it made it in our minutes.
Can county staff?
I don't think Andrew was reassigned. He was always assistant. John Ford had sent in his resignation. He has to resign due to health reasons. And it's up to the chair if they want to reappoint somebody to fill that vacancy. But at this juncture, we're not quite sure if the executive board for the committee wants to proceed with putting somebody on at this juncture of the process.
So we are still allowed to have 3 general public, right?
Correct.
Which would be myself, Nancy, and Andrew.
Yes.
And John is, should he appear on these minutes?
He was absent at that time, I think.
But now.
Since that time, he has
So now
resigned.
he is
Yeah.
resigned. Okay.
Yeah, I was going to update that later in the agenda. Does that help?
That was the only issue here that I.
So we are still in compliance with the allocations of positions relative to the state requirements. Just to get a quick affirmation from county.
Yes.
Very good. Okay. Any other comments? If not, all in favor of the minutes as presented, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? The minutes are approved. Old business. I guess this falls under old business. Anna, I'm going to turn it over to you to update us on database, and then we'll move into setting criteria and the implementation plan.
Sure. I'm gonna try and do this. So thanks for everybody for doing your homework. Excellent job. I think this was actually the best response so far. Here's all the sections that have been reviewed since the November meeting. This was your homework. It was primarily the database. We also talked about solid waste disposal areas, solid waste collection and transportation, demographics, and then detailed features of recycling and composting programs. So that was what you've been reviewing. And so here's the feedback that we received. So it just requires a little more, there's a couple things with clarifications, a couple things with edits. Sorry. So some of the questions were about categories of waste generators, just clarifying, do they make sense? I think, as I often find, is the way things are categorized by a state or federal group doesn't always resonate with us as the average person. So I just want to make sure that the categories, so it's I think schools fell under something like government, and I think, I'm trying to think of another one you guys called out. So just want to make sure that the categories there that describe the sectors of waste generators are accurate. There was also a question around proper terminology for waste. I believe in some of the landfill reporting, they use MCW, which is municipal commercial waste, versus MSW, which we've been using as part of this process. So I've been following the guidelines of the plan process, and it doesn't say anything about MCW, it says MSW, so I just want to clarify that we're using the right terminology. Another issue was raised, inclusion of facilities that absolutely no longer exist. It's not that they're closed, it's that they're physically not there anymore. And one of those is the U of M hospital incinerator. I know in some of the language it indicated that you should include closed facilities, but for ones that no longer exist, I need to just double check, do we need to put that in there? Similarly is adding things like inclusion of out-of-county landfills to the facility list. The reason why they're not in there now is because Arbor Hills is the facility within the county. There is demonstrated capacity, so you don't technically have to list those facilities. However, given that we know waste is regional and we know our stuff goes all over the place, we should probably list all of them to be consistent with the rest of what we're talking about in our plan. There was some identification of, wow, Dexter looks a lot bigger than it used to be, so we need to just double check that number. There's a question around subscription-based services and the definition, and making sure that it was, I guess, accurate to exactly what subscription-based services. The way it's defined is it would be a community that has no coordinated trash service, either through a city contract or city services. And I think some of the language is just, could be questionable, so I just want to double check that and I'll bring it back to you guys. And then finally, the population density map, someone raised that we need to double check Salem Township to see if that information is accurate. So those are the clarifications you all raised, which is excellent. As you know, when you look at this over and over again, it's nice to have fresh eyes, so I appreciate your fresh eyes on this. As far as the numbers, we were going to do this anyway, so I want to reassure is just double check that everything adds up. Several of you, I could see where you were going through and adding up and checking it was okay, which is great. I think there's a few places where some numbers need to be clarified, but for the most part, it's there, but we were going to do that as a final go-through anyway, you know, double checking everything. And then finally, some edits. There have been some different names for facilities and service providers. Even in the last 2 months, one of the service providers in the Detroit area got bought out, and so they now have a new name. So we should reflect that because our plan is still in draft form. And then just some more edits around ease of read, you know, making things in alphabetical order in tables or sorting from lowest to highest as far as the data, just ways to make it easier to read in the plan document. So that is the feedback that you guys provided, all excellent. So the next steps for us are to update all that and get it ready for a final review when we get to that point. So date to be determined, but we'll double check all of those things. We'll ask questions of you if we need any clarification from you to make sure we've answered them. But that's where we stand on the database section and the homework that you did last month. So we're ready for the next item when you are. Any questions? I guess I should ask that. Right?
And just as you move into the citing procedure review, just to clarify, based on the couple of comments in the public comment section, that this is a requirement of the plan update is to provide clarity on the citing procedure for any solid waste facility, right, that either exists or may exist in the future. So just to be clear that there's no decision made in raising this issue or having citing criteria on the agenda this evening. We are fulfilling our obligation under the terms of the solid waste planning process to review citing criteria for all solid waste facilities. So just wanted to reassure the public
Right.
in that regard.
The plan is open. We're looking at updating the whole entire plan. This is a part of the current plan, and so we're taking a closer look at it. And JD's going to lead us through a conversation about some potential proposed changes to make to what's already there to improve the process. So, yes.
Yes, please.
When I was looking at this citing process, what was going through my mind is this is for any kind of facility that might be brought before Washtenaw County. So I think that's what you were saying, but I wanted to clarify that just a little bit, that a new recycling operation would need to go through a process like this to require, or to determine that's necessary, that it's properly designed, that a multiple level of questions and requirements are addressed. And at City of Ann Arbor, just last week, there was a presentation from the Michigan Recycling Coalition saying that there is a statewide effort through the governor's office to double recycling in Michigan, and part of that is going to require additional recycling operations throughout the state. So when I was looking at this and seeing siting, I'm not thinking landfills, I'm thinking other kinds of things that might be coming up that deal with waste, but would still require a public process to review it.
Yeah. Oh,
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Nancy, it's perfect. Other comments as we get started? All right, so just to reflect on where what we've done ahead of the meeting, we talked about citing criteria at the November meeting. We compiled that feedback, and one of the next steps that was identified was, rather than develop a pros and cons list, let's talk to people who actually utilize their citing criteria. So I contacted the state. There was 2 counties that recently had utilized their citing criteria. I was able to get a hold of one, Ottawa County, which is on the western side of the state near the, I think north of the Grand Rapids area. And the other one is Bay County, which is in the Thumb area. Ottawa County was doing a landfill expansion. Not the same circumstances. The landfill's located in a less populated area than Arbor Hills would be. But they still went through this process, and I think it's you'll see a little bit of some of what we thought was good about the process and what we're going to present tonight. Bay City cited a transfer station. I was not able to get a hold of her, a couple voicemails and a couple of emails, and I'll keep pursuing that because I still think it's of interest and our plan is still in draft. We also looked at other county citing criteria beyond Southeast Michigan. A couple of meetings ago, I provided, here's what places in Southeast Michigan do, thinking those are more peer communities. So I broadened the search a little bit because after seeing what Ottawa is included, it was like, wow, there's some great ideas here, let's broaden the search a little bit. So what we did, and we being JD, who I'm going to introduce here in a second, developed a draft flow chart of the proposed process that we can walk you through just to talk about, do we want to include this in an updated plan. I'm going to exit out of this and pull it up on the screen for a better version than what you see there. J.D. Lindenberg is going to walk us through this. J.D. is the president at RRS and one of the owners, and has lots of experience here in Washtenaw County as a former resident. And yeah, I'm going to turn it over to him. He handed out this actual handout to the committee, and JD, I'm going to have to, here we go.
It's all right.
This might work. So I'm going to let him walk you through what we put together. A little more colorful than my usual stuff too. So, are you going to?
Yeah. So first of all, nice to see you all. Can everybody hear me? I prefer not to drag this around. Everybody hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So before we jump into the details of this, Nancy, I liked your comment, because one of the points I was going to make is, as a committee and as a community, we're required to have a citing process. We're required to have a citing process for all kinds of facilities. And so consequently, my advice to you is to make sure you have a well thought through process, or actually in this case, set of processes, because what we're learning is that this is not just one process. There are actually 3 separate processes here. There's the solid waste planning process, which if you look closely at the enabling legislation at the state level, we're supposed to redo our plan every 5 years. And for those of you who actually read this, you see that the approved plan refers to capacity for a landfill through 2015. Clearly out of date. Clearly something that means that it should be updated. And so consequently, probably a pretty smart idea to open the plan up and talk about it. And do it in the context of doing it. So that's one process. There's the second process, which is the actual application process for implementing a new facility of any kind. Could be the siting of a composting facility, could be the siting of a transfer station, could be siting of a waste processing facility or material recovery facility, as we call it. There's 4 or 5 of them in the county. You can look at the facility list, you know what they are. There's disposal facilities, incinerators, and landfills. All of which, in their own way, need an application process. And that's where the specific siting criteria get applied in that process, that second process that I'm talking about. And then there's a third process that I'm not going to talk about much tonight, which is the MDEQ process for construction licensure, which can take 120 days, and believe you me, having gone through this, that process took 119 working days. You can do the math and figure out how much of a year that is. Followed by construction of your facility and then an operating license that takes another 90 working days, not 90 calendar days, 90 working days, for its approval, which arrived at 105 the last time we did it, right? And so there's that third process, which is somewhat opaque and impenetrable, and people here don't have much control over it, except for those poor people who sit on the committee to try to revise it. And thank you all for doing that, because that's a process that's happened 2 or 3 different times, and I participated in at least one of them and didn't go through. So we're still stuck with that process. And the reason I bring that up is we're working under enabling legislation, and the rules that we're dealing with here are working under enabling legislation, and I think Mike was probably put together in the 70s, right?
Maybe no later than the 80s.
No later than the 80s. Okay. So the point that I want to make is, when this got put together, we all got blessed with a process that somebody at the time thought was a good one. So for instance, a lot of people say, why can't the communities on the other side of this county boundary be involved in this committee? It makes sense. I can understand it. Truth of the matter is, that's not the way the legislation was written, and so consequently, this committee and its makeup is extremely constrained. And so, it's made up of the people it can be made up of, but adding somebody who would logically be part of it across a county border, that gets hard. Why did it get set up that way? Why, for instance, the gentleman suggested that local units within X distance have a veto power over it. Well, for some very good policy and planning reasons, we have a process that got set up so no particular local unit can veto something. And let's think about why that is. If that were the case, we wouldn't have any number of public goods. And in this case, from an economist perspective, a landfill is a public good. There's very few of us who don't generate any garbage. It has to go somewhere. And if we couldn't site it anywhere, we wouldn't have anything to do with it except pile it up in the back alley the way we used to do in the Middle Ages, which had its own set of problems. So these things got set up so that there was a planning process set on top of it, that the counties were given the authority and the responsibility for creating a circumstance that enabled us to have the processing of garbage, the disposal of garbage in place in a helpful way. And so that's why we're dealing with a system like this. And frankly, from good planning theory, it makes sense. Unfortunately, for neighbors who live next to it, it can feel like it's unfair. So, one of the things that I got assigned to by Anna here was to try to pull this apart and make this accessible and put it into a place where perhaps for subsequent groups like this, they can have a little bit more clarity about the process they're going to use in the future. And so what I put together was a draft flowchart that said, okay, one of the issues here is that we're conflating the plan amendment or the planning process with the actual application process. So I talked about 3, planning, application, and the MDEQ. For right now, we're going to forget about the MDEQ. We're going to take that off the table. because that's what happens. We're gonna assume that's an endpoint. But before we get to that endpoint, what I want to suggest to the committee is that we take our existing somewhat oversimplified process and say, let's break this into two. Let's say the very first thing that we need to do is have somebody like Dave Rattel from Advance come in like he did and say, hey, I want more airspace at my landfill. It's a perfectly reasonable request. Then there's a decision point for when he meets with county staff. There's an existing landfill plan that says, is that possible under the terms of this plan? And if it isn't, and it's not consistent with that plan, then two things can happen. One is, there's no going past go at that point. It's not consistent, we're not gonna do it, and full stop. The other alternative is to say, okay, for a whole host of reasons that are legitimate, we're gonna open the planning process. And that's what the county chose to do in this case, is they opened the planning process to consider an amendment to the plan. Lots of good reasons for doing that. I talked about them earlier. Plan needed to be updated. Lots of things didn't make any sense in the plan. A whole bunch of other things there. So they decided to open the plan. We're going through the planning amendment process right now. And what I'm suggesting then is that is, Anna, if we can move here. This is Mr. Rattel sitting down with Megan and Jeff. It was on some level an initial consistency evaluation and said, hey, this isn't going to work under our current plan. So that couldn't move directly to the application because it wasn't consistent at that point. Should we choose to reconsider this with a plan amendment? And we did, a legitimate choice. And so now, if you move this up slightly, what I'm suggesting is we formalize this process to say, hey, listen, we go through this process that we're in the middle of right now. I'm approving the plan, doing plan amendments, turning the crank, doing all the things we need to do with local and government approval throughout Washtenaw County, all those kinds of things. Your committee's vote, recommendations to the Board of Commissioners, final vote by Board of Commissioners, up or down on this. And then take it to the MDEQ, has to sign off on it because that plan has to adhere to certain guidelines that they have. Get to a point where we're then approved. And then if that approval actually contemplates this initial idea that we had, and I understand at this point it's not going to, but if it were, then you're in this position where what you can do is you can accept the formal application with all the engineering documents and all the planning documents for an expansion and constitute, again, this comes back to this committee. And this committee then we suggest, and this is something Anna came up with that I really liked a lot from Ottawa County, that this committee takes a subset of this committee and makes it the facility review subcommittee that is then asked to review this completed application for whatever solid waste activity that comes under this plan, whether it's an expansion of a material recovery facility, a transfer station, a new composting facility, a landfill expansion, whatever it may be. They come through this process in here, and they not only review the technical merits of it, but they review the operational qualities. And in a circumstance where they then have public meetings, where there's an initial evaluation, the opportunity for people who are affected by this, whether in county or out, to make their commentary known, give that feedback, go through several iterations of review with the applicant, and then, based on that, come back at another formal second meeting, make a recommendation to this whole body as to how they would then proceed. Then this whole body, the Solid Waste Planning Commission, would operate, would pass judgment on this, go through the process with the Board of Commissioners. And what I've done is I've subsumed a lot of steps in here for the sake of clarity and not having multiple pages here. And identify whether this application then is formally compliant with the current solid waste plan that's in place. And if it is, then they're directed to start cranking on the MDEQ process, so we know it can take 120 plus construction plus 90 days, i.e. year and a half. Otherwise, their application is denied. So to go back to, why do I suggest we do this? Because essentially, this is what we're doing right now, but on a sort of ad hoc basis. I'm saying let's formally separate the planning process, which is the part on the on the left side, lower down, so that process proceeds apace on its own, gets to a point where then it can accept and judge the actual formal application and move through this. And mostly, your plan and its application process and the requirements for that application process, which are thorough and well thought through, work for this. So what you have is 2 or 3 steps along the road where you have an opportunity to approve or disapprove. And I think what this then does is lays out a logical process that gives both the public, county staff, and these committees and the elected officials a recognized process that says, hey, here's the points where we can interject our feedback. Here's the points where we hear from the public. Here's the points where we can take critical feedback and use that to impact the overall process. And I think what you end up with is a good, transparent process that takes into account all of the kinds of public good that we have here, whether it's neighborhood concerns about bad operations, which in there I would be concerned about, and balance those against the need for the services that are provided by that facility. Did I miss anything, Ann?
Yeah, I bet you're gonna have some questions though, so I'll reserve myself until questions happen.
All right, let's open it up for conversation. Yes, Nancy?
I have a clarifying question with your diagram. To start with, see with your green, yes, no structure that you can go directly into blue or you go through the plan amendment. Why would you circumvent this one loop?
Because if you already have a plan, so for instance, I will give you a for instance. City of Ann Arbor comes to this group and comes to the county and says, I want to expand my transfer station by 400 square feet because I want to take household hazardous waste or something. The existing transfer station is 10,000 square feet, and your plan right now says that any expansion of a transfer station or other processing facility like the MRF by less than 50% of its current footprint is consistent with the plan. So you don't have to amend the plan to accept that application. Consequently, the preliminary consistency evaluation says, yes, it's consistent. Move directly to the application process.
Thank you for that example. I want to see a plan that tightens any automatic approval of landfill, that just because it's, only inching its way into adjacent property, that it can't be automatically approved in any way, shape, or form, that it has to go through a full public process.
So how can the plan be more clear? Because right now, the plan says,
I want to make sure there's no loopholes in it, that someone can
in
just...
my view, you have to proceed to a plan amendment process. I mean, it's very clear, I forget what it says exactly, but no incinerators, and I think this gentleman over here quoted it verbatim.
Well, remember the infilling the 2 solid waste hills that were at the old landfill, that managed to kind of go through without any public process. And,
I can't comment on,
okay, back history.
I can't comment on whether or not that hadn't been pre-approved. Because if it had been pre-approved, then it was consistent.
Judy, isn't it fair to say, isn't it fair to say though that I think we're trying to avoid the loopholes
Yeah.
because the process is layered. And so you wouldn't be able to, I'm trying to think of an example of how this might work, but you have to go through the planned amendment process before anything. And so if pick something else other than Arbor Hills example, a MRF came and you know, and you went through the plan amendment process, and the approved amendment said, this, you know, this is gonna expand, or this is a new facility, and it states that, that it goes through that public process first, and then, once that whole plan is approved, then it would go through this subcommittee process. So there's actually multiple ways to go through a public process, where the feedback would be provided. And let me just add further on the model for this facility review committee, is, I really, and I should have shared it before the meeting and I didn't, I apologize, I'll send it out after. The Ottawa County language is really great about understanding that when facilities get cited or asked to be expanded, that there's more than just the technical capabilities and the technical details and specifications, and that there's impacts that are beyond that. And it takes into consideration those things, which I think is what we've been hearing time and again here, that that's important, and it is important, and we should be inclusive of that. So while that detail isn't in this particular diagram, I would expect the language itself to be explicit to that, that we would want to make sure that this isn't just, you know, dotting the i's and crossing the t's of an application, but there's other requirements in there, like, you know, just that are beyond, and explaining what those, explaining what the impacts might be, and really taking a closer look at that. Does that help at all? Or are you still seeing that it's, does that not meet what you're trying to avoid?
I think
You can think about it.
it
Not to
could
put you on the
be-
spot.
to maybe, I want to just make sure that I'm thinking of this correctly, but to use the example we're all very comfortable with, which is Arbor Hills landfill, they have pulled their request, or it's no longer being considered as a facility modification in this current plan, right?
Mhm.
So, once this plan the plan amendment process is done, we're on public comment, we go through the process of meeting with local communities, VOC, and it's on to the DEQ. If the exact same request comes back to the county, then we have to go back to stage one and determine consistency, et cetera.
Correct.
Does that do?
And because the way the plan says it right now, it says it's not consistent, so you could technically just say no, or you can consider it for an amendment, and you'd have to go through that first loop, and then go through the second loop. John?
One of the distinctions, though, I think, that made this different was that it was really old. I mean, we had a really old plan that needed to be revised, or we felt needed to be revised, but was the application consistent with the old plan?
No,
So there
the old
was,
plan is what we're looking at. The old plan was what he cited.
but, okay, so it was inconsistent with that, but we chose to, in any case, go through the revision process anyway.
Absolutely.
So that's how we proceeded.
Yep.
Okay. Is there any requirement, if something's inconsistent, but it was revised within the past year? So timing, however recently or long ago it was revised has really nothing to do.
What it has to do is what is
Just
the approved
consistency.
plan right now. And that's actually one of the problems. The approved plan right now is pretty old. It has, it's very clear on this specific topic, but it's fairly aged with regard to half a dozen other things. It should be cleaned up. So, you know, personally, I thought it was a smart move built in the plan.
Paul?
The planning committee isn't a standing committee, it only gets formed when the plan needs to get updated.
That's
or
correct.
amended.
You're not condemned to this forever.
Okay. So as long as we're going down through the orange boxes, then a planning committee's formed. And if you get up to this point, then having the facility review subcommittee being a subcommittee of the planning committee makes sense.
Yes.
But if you take the direct route, then there is no planning committee
Yes, there is.
convened.
I'm sorry, that was my oversight, if that's not clear.
Okay,
Because the first step that you have to do is convene a solid waste planning committee.
even if it's already consistent with the existing plan.
Correct, because you still have to review, the solid waste planning committee is still gonna have to take the subcommittee's recommendation and must pass judgment on it before it gets passed on to local units for approval and board of commissioners.
Okay.
So in any case, there would need to be a new solid plan.
It gets convened regardless,
Yes.
which road it takes. Okay, that makes sense then.
Can you indicate in the arrows that are going around where that would be?
It would probably be right here. You know, if they submit an application to designated county department, and it was deemed preliminarily consistent.
The top box actually addresses it, it just needs to be more explicit.
Yes.
The solid waste planning committee is gonna form a subcommittee, the solid waste planning committee needs to be
Formed
formed.
first.
So we just need to be specific on that.
Partly I couldn't fit more boxes on it.
Mike had his hand raised up before.
Okay.
Right, I just have a
Yes,
better
thank
view than you do. Yes.
So, who makes the determination of preliminary consistency?
I think it actually is that sort of a staff discussion that's a courtesy to the applicant. Because, to be honest, right now, the way it works is the applicant could run this application up to flagpole, solid waste planning committee could get formed, and then they have to go through the exercise of completing this pretty detailed application, they waste the money on that and get voted out. So in a way, this early conversation is, hey, listen, we want to expand, in his case, I want X yards of airspace, we're thinking about doing that. Jeff or Megan says, hey, you know, my reading of the plan says that's not consistent in this statement. My guess is Dave, being smarter than your average bear, probably read that same thing, said, hey, I think I gotta move into the amendment process, and then we were off to the races in forming this committee, and what I'm trying to do is peel these processes apart, so we have a little bit more, it's a little more closed in, where we know what we're doing, when we're doing it, and when to move on.
I'm just trying to be very clear about who the formal authority is. So I'm wondering, is this,
The formal authority is going to be this committee.
but in determining the preliminary consistency, is that the
That's a
decision of
courtesy.
the Board of Public Works or the staff?
I would say that would be, in this case, it would be Board of Public Works as a courtesy to the applicant to say, you know, you're gonna get shot down if you just show up with this application.
Okay, then my second question is this flow chart essentially a description of the current process?
No.
What's changed?
The current process, I would say, is really, you should, formally, Dave should submit an application for a review, for completeness, and a review for consistency. The problem is that they already knew that it wasn't going to be consistent. So what had to happen then is you had to engage in this process. And all I'm really saying is, let's formalize this and not get the cart before the horse.
Makes sense.
Let's just recognize this, because, you know, as much as I'd like to see, you know, MCI prepare something for you, why do the whole application if it's not going to go anywhere?
But to be fair, JD, it seems like the left-hand side, the top blue bullet, the light green, and then the orange is what we're currently doing. That process is what's in place right now.
That's kind of what you, yes.
Because of the consistency factor that was determined at some point at the county.
Correct, exactly. I'm just saying, let's just put this in something that's a little more evident.
What's not clear in the current plan is the timing and how these operate together.
Right.
And that's one thing that JD, through this flow chart, I think helps to explain, because there's citing review process in there. It doesn't say anything about when it's initiated, how it interjects with the activities of this committee. It's very vague. And so this marries the two. It's important, both processes, and this marries the two, but yet keeps them separate and defines them as having specific responsibilities. So I think that's important to point out. I know Christina had her hand.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so is that subcommittee, is those public meetings?
Say that
Is
again.
Of the subcommittee, the green box, those are public meetings, or
Yeah.
how is
Yes.
that, those are public meetings? And how many people are on that subcommittee?
The Ottawa example, I think there was a total of 5, and
how
it
did
was,
they pick them?
how did they pick them? It was, so first of all, you can pick whoever you want, that's, you know, if we set this up this way. I think they had, someone from the host community, so that would be Salem. They had an environmental representative, which is, we have a couple on our committee here. I wanna say a county representative, Maybe the Board of Commissioners representative, I could pull it out,
So
actually.
it wasn't members of just this board, a subcommittee,
It
it
was.
was other people outside of this?
No, it was mostly members of this group, because it is a subcommittee. However, you could decide, well, we really want somebody else on there. It made sense, though, in my opinion, of having it be a true subcommittee of the actual committee. Because you have the concerns represented for the most part.
How much time did it add to the process? Like, I don't know if it's possible or if that's, like, we could put like, this process is 90 days, this process should be 30 days, so on the flow chart, so you could like timeline it out, and then you go, oh, that's gonna take me 3 years to get from A to the end. It will, yeah. And then like working days, so people don't think it's like
Yeah.
90 days.
We didn't add that yet, just because this is preliminary, but in a write-up version, I think we want to be pretty specific about timing. And timing helps a couple of things. It keeps the process flow moving. The Ottawa County example was very specific about if you don't do anything within 90 days, you're considered good and the applicant can go ahead. And of course, you don't want to have that happen. So it keeps everybody moving along on the right path. And the days are important, but consider, so we being Washington County, opened this plan. And we're updating it all right now because it hasn't been done. So it's taking longer than what could be in the future is if, say, in 3 years, somebody comes back and says, hey, we wanna build a new compost facility. It wouldn't, if you're just updating for that part, this committee wouldn't meet for as long. It would still have to go through the necessary steps. But you wouldn't need 12 months worth of meetings, you might just need 2. So it could be reduced. And then the facility subcommittee is really intended to be not as long. I think it was, I want to say it's anywhere from a 3 to 6 month process, which doesn't seem as long, but I guess if you're waiting to build your facility, it probably is a long time. But yeah, we should definitely add the timing around that for all those reasons I said.
Was there any examples, and I'm sorry if I'm jumping part of that, was there any examples for less environmentally sensitive facilities to get a fast track that you saw? A type B transfer station that wants to do that.
Yes.
Was there any examples that the county may want to look at, or this group want to look at as a flow chart for less onerous type of, to help recycling?
But you started to say
So for instance, single stream recycling facilities technically don't have to go through this at all.
Yeah, speak up a little bit.
Single stream recycling facilities that don't have any garbage associated with them don't necessarily have to go through this at all, because you don't have to go through the MDQ process. Nor do you have to do with type B transfer stations. Type B transfer stations for folks are, what's the tonnage on a type? It's like
300 cars a day or something.
it's very small. The kind of thing you'd see in rural Michigan, just as a courtesy.
I guess what I'm bringing up is that I don't know if the board want to see a fast track, not for like a landfill, not for a processing facility or compost facility, but something that's less sensitive that you don't have to go this onerous.
I would,
you need to do.
I for one would appreciate that, at least that
So
conversation.
see a version of this for something like that. I don't know if we can replicate something.
And that's my question. Is there
Yeah.
anything out there in other county subdivision plans that have a fast track for certain?
So this is where you get into weirdnesses with the MDQ. As much as they should be, yard waste composting facilities are not included in this process. But the addition of food waste makes them be included completely, which is very nonsensical in some ways, but that happens. So I would say that this process is devoted solely to those things that require licensure and permitting by the DEQ, which are solid waste processing facilities, transfer stations, type 1 transfer stations, and landfills and incinerators.
So you kind of answered the question. No, you can't do a fast track because that is this all the time.
Right.
Yes.
Excuse me, since the DEQ is part of the process of approving this, would it not be appropriate to have your local MDEQ representative, solid waste representative on the committee that makes the decision as to whether or not the facilities being proposed do in fact meet all the criteria? as opposed to a random cross-section of county. I mean, I'm not trying to put down
Call
anybody.
yourselves random?
Yeah, I think we're kind of random up here. Anyway,
So let me address that. The DEQ is very careful to keep its own authority in this process. And there are 3 stages in which they get involved. There is the 2 stages I've already talked about, licensing and permitting. But there's another required step that I glossed over as part of the application process, where the applicant is required to have a DEQ advisory analysis that is formally undertaken with a formal letter response that becomes part of this committee's deliberations, where essentially they go down this checklist, and if at any point that fails, you are essentially instructed to turn the application down.
that is an important piece of information.
So, I didn't bring them up, but they're in there, and I think they prefer to have that place. They don't want people sitting on these committees, to be honest.
They don't want to lose control, that's what they don't want.
Right.
Okay, thank you.
Is it possible for Washtenaw County to include or require a citing process for facilities that the state does not currently require
Good question.
citing?
They would say no. So that would be a question that probably has to be asked of Corporation Council. As Megan well knows, well, you met with them too, Brian, they get very touchy about certain really peculiar parts of it. And in particular, if you're talking about composting, especially around yard waste,
Yes.
they are very reluctant to take on additional work. And if that means that you're including it in your process that's piggybacking on theirs, they take a very big deal.
If they were to say that is not allowable, could the county institute its own citing process that is independent of
I'm not
any
sure.
state authority?
I'm not sure.
That, I would like to see that.
I'd like to
I
see
tend,
that.
I tend to agree with Frank, that it's not, but
I don't.
just because of general.
And not that I'm necessarily opposed to, there could be some very public goods that come out of these facilities, but I also think that there's great value in engaging a public process and ensuring that the neighbors are, and their concerns are addressed, even with these more benign facilities that might not be part of the state's portfolio. So we just put that
So
in.
certainly we can ask the question, and do a little bit of investigation, but I'm not terribly optimistic.
Yeah, John.
Is the FRS that you've indicated here, as you've indicated here, a subset of this committee? Okay. Is it also the same body that in some plans includes engineers, geologists, things like that, people like that?
The model of Ottawa County did not include any of that. It was made up of members of this group, which have different, you're here under different titles. You've got environmental interests, you've got local representation, you got waste industry representation. That's the Ottawa County model. That's a detail to be discussed.
I've seen other plans, I mean, you handed out
It's
5
this
of them.
plan. This current plan actually has that.
Has a makeup of a geological engineer or some other people, right? Yeah. Because I honestly feel uncomfortable with, let's say, 5 people from this committee only passing this on. And not that I diminish my own qualities or any other person's capabilities, but I just wouldn't feel comfortable with that.
The criteria that's laid out, that's part of the application, would be what the subcommittee would be required to review. So that's very specific. So it's either a yes or no. It is no maybe. It's, do they meet these 25 things or whatever that list is? And those are, that's what's currently part of the current plan as an example. And I think for some of the stuff that some of our Northfield Township folks handed out about the citing criteria, here's what it needs to be. So it's not so much, you're checking for that consistency, part of it, not so much a judgment call on impact to the substrate of the land beneath it, or, you know, I'm making up geological words right now, but you get my point. It's not to determine the engineering sophistication of such a facility. It's to make sure it meets this application, and then where it really gets vetted is then it goes to the MDEQ part, and that's where they're looking at it as a real deal. You know, that's where it's gonna get under further scrutiny to make sure all that stuff is happening correctly. But I understand what you're saying, John, I got what you said.
Well, actually, extending what John just said, I would assume it would be the right of the committee that if there was a question asked or a concern brought up relative to consistency, that they could say, we want a hydrogeologist report on this particular aquifer that's associated with that piece of land. They could do that, right?
They could, I think you just wanna make sure, is that gonna help for any particular reason? So if the committee's not made of people who can decipher what that means, then I wouldn't wanna ask for it. But you're right, they could ask for additional information, if
Yeah,
needed.
I mean, yeah, exactly.
Right. But I think the onus in the process becomes on the applicant to demonstrate why this is a good thing, you know, why you should proceed with this. I shouldn't say a good thing, but why you should proceed with this. And I think the first, you know, the initial evaluation meeting, which is meeting number 1, you know, is the subcommittee looking at an application, making sure, you know, from first glance, yes, this is consistent. It would also provide the opportunity for the applicant to then present their application and what their plan is and what they're going to do. So that's something we haven't had in this process now that request is off the table for the foreseeable future. So we never got to that point, but it would be great. It would have been nice to have. So that's what that initial thing, and then meeting 2, I think, is to, you know, okay, come, you know, here was the questions asked. You need to give us more information. Come back, and then the subcommittee just you know, makes a recommendation that then gets forwarded onto the larger group.
Mike, you have a question?
So could you help me see if I understand the flow chart right? On the way the plan is currently written and the way that the proposed plan, the draft plan, is currently drafted, any proposal for a landfill expansion or for a new landfill is not consistent with the plan and therefore cannot move forward unless the county goes through a plan amendment process. So if this new plan gets adopted, were Advanced Disposal to bring their landfill expansion proposal back, or some other developer were to propose a new landfill, the county would have to, I guess county commission, the Board of Public Works and the county commission would have to re-impanel a committee like this one that we sit on right now, presumably all different people. And there'd be a new plan that would have to get written. And they could choose not to do that, in which case the proposal from Advanced or whoever would not go forward. But the only way it could go forward would be if a new committee got formed, the plan got amended to make it consistent. And then we have this process that still allows the county to allow other kinds of facilities, recycling facilities, composting facilities, and what have, transfer stations, what have you, to go through some kind of review process with the facility, whatever it's called.
Some of which require an amendment to the plan, and some of which don't.
All right, now that's getting a little more complicated than wanting, but I was trying to understand the core issue that I think people are here about. And do I have that right,
You have it right.
that's how things stand and will stand if the draft plan is approved as it's written right
You
now?
have it.
Thank you.
Can I piggyback on that understanding? So the decision on whether to consider a plan amendment would fall presumably to the Board of Public Works and Board of Commissioners.
The decision to impanel this body
Yes.
would fall to them.
And
The decision to actually entertain the amendment would fall to this body.
Right,
You would then move on that
okay,
through this process, go through the process of local unit approval,
yes,
and then go back to the Board of Commissioners.
okay.
With a review process in there from the MDQ, that it dots all the i's and crosses all the t's into which they want.
So my question then is, do those bodies have the ability to make a subjective decision on whether to move forward or not? Or are these decisions intended to be or will be designed to be based on objective criteria on a go or no go? So in other words, is it like a zoning
You have an ability-
decision that if the zoning regulations are clear, it doesn't matter what the subjective opposition is, it needs to go forward because it's consistent with zoning. So can you
To
respond?
use your zoning analogy?
Yes,
If the zone is right for the facility, then you move through the application process. If it's not consistent with the plan, that's like a PUD, for those of you who've done zoning, where you gotta get special permission to change the plan, essentially change the zoning. And right now, any landfill consideration is a PUD, and that can be, you know, you impanel your committee, and if you're all anti-landfill, we impaneled all Stop Arbor Hills people, and they were on this. And they decided they want to proceed with the amendment, and wouldn't proceed.
and the county commissioners would have that similar authority early on in deciding whether or not to even allow the amendment process.
I believe that's correct. I didn't come prepared
Okay.
to comment on those technicalities.
I think consistency evaluation, this Board of Public Works, and then the next step is to call for the formation of this committee, which is appointed by the Board of Commissioners. So there are two stages, but the request for the consistency evaluation is not, to my knowledge, at the Board of Commissioner level. And I can try to get some clarification on that, but I'm like 99% certain that's a Board of Public Works function, that's why that group exists. But then the Board of Commissioners does appoint this body to sit here.
Jeff makes them.
Yes, please.
This one for Anna. In our current plan on pages 3-34, you don't have to turn to it and sing together with me, but we looked at this before a few months ago, and there was discussion, but I don't remember the outcome from it, about people on the siting, the siting committee, and there was some discussion that it was so top-heavy with people voting from the county's point of view as opposed to just advisory. I don't know that we've seen what the revised makeup would look like. And also, so it'd be interesting for the group to be able to see that. And then also, if we have an opportunity to look at some of these things, like we were suggested today in a handout about, what do they call it? Standard siting criteria, minimum requirements. Will we as a group be able to look at those again and see if there are some things that need to be adjusted?
So yes to both. So the next step would be to take this diagram and turn it into text that would then be reviewed by you guys. So it would address both of those things. And I think the, the committee makeup part, we'll put forward a recommendation and then have it up for discussion with you guys. But we'll at least have something for you to react to, and as a starting point. And then yes to the minimum criteria stuff.
Oh,
I guess I understood this as this facility review subcommittee replaced this siting committee, but that's not the case?
No, it would.
does.
It would. I think Nancy's bringing back initial review of this. Comments were made about, let's look at the makeup of the group. And so now we've put forward this different group, and so the makeup would be different yet again.
And honestly, that was one of the major reasons for reopening the plan. The makeup of the group, just that whole list of who sits on the committee didn't work.
Yeah.
Some of those departments don't exist.
Yeah, most of the
anymore.
departments don't exist anymore, and so it needs to be updated
Oh,
anyway.
okay.
But I think really what Nancy's getting to is representation and who's the right, what's the right mix to have there.
I guess one concern I had was that the existing plan calls for a representative from the road commission, where if it was a subcommittee of this committee, we wouldn't have road commission. one of the biggest issues seems to be traffic and things like that. It wouldn't be good to lose that expertise, that representation.
Yes, good point.
Given this plan is laid out, and understanding the state statute that limits the ability for us to get too creative in terms of the membership on these various committees and who the decision-making bodies are, is there a way for us to take into consideration some of the feedback we've received from Wayne County residents to be able to more transparently engage them in any kind of citing process, short of just having to do like they're doing now and having to just dog a committee process and provide public comments during assigned periods of a meeting?
So my opinion, I know, differs from some public opinion on this, and it also differs a bit, perhaps even from some panel members, but in my review of this, this was designed initially to be a county process, and the statute is very clear about the limitations of going outside of your jurisdiction in spite of the obvious contradiction that has for property that is on the line. You know, and so, you know, personally, I think there are at-large memberships from the environmental community, which would be a way to engage some of that. You know, if there's 3 environmental spots or how many there are, I don't know, Mike, one of the ways you handle that is maybe an environmental commission, maybe Stop Arbor or .org is considered an environmental organization. I don't know. It might be. And you get some representation that way. I think it gets very hard in considering the standing of Northfield Township as a governmental entity or Northfield Schools as a governmental entity. There's no provision made for any of the Washington County schools. I think your original observation, the state statute strictly limits some of this, is absolutely true. Honestly, my personal view on this whole thing, we should be planning regionally for these things. And it should be a southeastern Michigan regional discussion about where landfills are, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what we have right now.
Just a response to that, and it's getting late in the process for us, but there are other communities throughout the state that do their plans as multi-counties because they're just small enough that they can't manage it, and so it doesn't make sense. So it is possible to envision a multi-county approach.
It is.
It would be very unwieldy, given all the cast of characters within Washington County, because you've got Detroit as its own entity and Wayne County, whatever, but it is possible to proceed in a Southwest plan multi-county.
You're right, it is. I have to say, though, given the planning structure the way it is right now, it's pretty set in concrete. You'd have to get MDQ approval for this. We can't just go, you know.
And you have representation from the regional government, so I mean, I know it's not a catch-all, but you do have that perspective as part of the makeup of this group, which I think is important, and I think, you know, our particular representative has brought forth a lot of the regional stuff, so.
Yeah, not to send us in a completely different direction or take up more time, but is there a brief way that either of you could share any activity at the state level that would come about from the sustainability advisory panel that was to talk about changes to the planning process and where that stands? Will there be proposed legislation changes?
I think county might have I don't know, or you're probably haven't been involved lately.
No, we haven't been involved.
I'm sure we can find something. I know they just discussed it, when was that, a couple weeks ago, Noel?
That was
In November, yeah.
They closed comments in August, so.
Early
No, but they
December.
had a discussion through a Michigan Recycling Coalition event, and it was discussed. I think that might be the latest. I mean, we can find that information and share with you. I think what we've said since the beginning is, we know that that's on the horizon, but we have to go through our process. So like, if it literally was gonna change in January, maybe, you know, we would take some, you know, if the timing was closer, I think we'd take more into consideration there.
I just wasn't sure whether it was a
It's
year or
been
5
on the
years.
horizon for 20 years.
Yeah.
So if you had asked this
That helps.
question 20 years ago, we'd have said, yeah, 2 or 3 years from now, we'll have something changed.
Okay.
At this point, I can't hold and say.
Right.
Okay. Well,
And remember, our goals and objectives were very much in the spirit of, we want to work regionally. And so, yes, they're broad goals and objectives, but they're also, they touch upon a lot of the ambitions of this group of making sure that that happens, and that becomes then, you know, becomes part of the implementation plan, which we'll talk about next, and then it also becomes part of what, you know, county staff is charged with as part of that execution and responsibility for the plan. So, not perfect, but I want to make sure we're at least acknowledging that there's bits and pieces there, and we continue to make them better. So let's not forget those, but there's always room for improvement. So.
Other comments or questions on the citing criteria at this point? If not, it sounds like you will take the feedback received this evening and work up a narrative and maybe slightly amend the flow chart as well.
Well, certainly, clarify.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's definitely a work in progress, and I wanted to thank you all for bearing with, you know, my shoddy graphics, among other things.
I think it turned out pretty good.
No, appreciate it.
Yep.
And I want to say, this is pretty complicated stuff. So, you know, it's worth wrestling on.
Mhm.
So thanks to JD, that was great. If you walk away from this and still have questions about this, please email me. I would like to utilize JD's expertise, so it'd be better to email me ahead of the meeting than coming next month, because JD's probably not going to be here. So, so if you're, you know, on your drive home, like, oh, I wish I would have asked about this, feel free to email me, and I'll make sure that that question gets answered. Yes, Megan?
So timeline-wise, do you know when we'll have a draft to review?
So part of my homework is, I would like to have a draft, because we're getting into the holidays, have a draft a week ahead of the next meeting. So the next meeting is the 11th of January, and so I want to have it to you by the 4th. So hopefully all the holiday madness will be behind us, and that gives you a week to look at it.
No eggnog stains on the paper.
No eggnog stains on the paper, no, no.
And you're talking about a full draft?
A full draft of citing review
Oh,
process, not the full draft. John, please, don't get ahead of yourself there. But that will be ongoing in the background. I'm going to be focusing on getting a draft of this. But we've got a good chunk of the comments for some of the largest sections of the plan that just need to be updated. So it's coming together piece by piece. And this is another one chunk. Okay.
On to implementation plan.
All right. So, last month we talked a little bit about this. You guys gave some great feedback. And so, some of the feedback I had received ahead of the meeting, just to recap, was, this is county taking the lead, but really needs the right level of support. Let me back up again. Implementation plan is how all of this is going to be put into action once this group is done. What happens once you guys are, everything's signed, sealed, delivered, and this committee's not meeting on a monthly basis. So this is the what's next. And so in the plan, there's specific things that we have to address. And so I'll walk you through some of the feedback you've already given and kind of what our next steps are on this. So we know the county is the lead, but they need help, and really it kind of gets to resources, both financial and labor, of who's going to do all of this. I mean, the county staff have their full-time jobs now, and this is part of it, but we're putting a lot of stuff on them through this process. And I think really it looks at, funding sources. How are we going to pay for all of this? There's lots of ideas, lots of initiatives that I think this group has put forward in the goals and objectives and the vision. Essentially looking towards not a zero waste future, and so how are we going to get there? It's, you have this opportunity with the implementation plan development, because this is gonna go in front of all of the local units of government, you have this opportunity to say, we're gonna start to we wanna pursue things, we wanna do these things, and really get some buy-in as part of this process. So that's what we're envisioning the implementation plan draft to look like. So the guiding principles, I think, are things, these are already included in the plan draft, but these are what are gonna drive some of the implementation plan next steps, is we're working towards these things. We're working towards access and convenience. We're working towards more diversion, less disposal, better education and outreach, better data and measurement, better funding, more funding, and better coordination and collaboration. So what's required for the plan is a timetable for implementation, which I'll note is 20 pages before you get into describing the management components. So I was really confused looking at this, going, why is this up like this? So we have to do a timetable. We have to address management components. Two things that stuck out from the current plan that I want to keep in there is system organization. So, who's responsible for what, redefining the county, because the descriptions in there are out of date, woefully out of date. I was an intern the last time this plan was approved, so we know that's not happening anymore. So, and then, what does the funding look like? And then, who are the responsible parties? Who are required, who have ownership in this process? And so we want to make sure all of that's laid out. I think the language actually, talks about, legal capabilities, technical capabilities. There's a lot of detail in there, and that will be addressed. But these are the two things that jumped out at me in the current draft that we want to have a part of it. So, next steps. So the county and RRS are going to meet next week to discuss the implementation plan. Clearly, this past month we spent a lot of time on the siting review process. So we're going to meet with the county and talk about what this might look like. Again, we'll have a draft that same January 4th deadline. I would like to get you a draft of an implementation plan, and then our January meeting will discuss the final, or not final, but the next draft of the siting review and also the implementation plan. You guys have provided, I've asked for feedback already around what should go into implementation plan. We talked about it last meeting, so you can reference the minutes for the discussion. But if you have any thoughts between now and then, please share them. As part of the discussion. So the county, we're going to meet on Monday, and send your comments along. We'll include it as part of the discussion. So that's it for implementation plan at this point. Comments or questions?
Will that also be available to us by January 4th?
Yes.
Other comments, questions, Mike?
Can I just throw an idea out on the table here, and this could lead to a long discussion that I don't want us to necessarily have tonight, but maybe just offer something for folks to chew on for later. I've been part of a lot of public sector plans that get developed by, at different levels, state level, municipal level, what have you, and, unless there's, in most cases, there are a lot of great ideas that are incorporated in them, and there may or may not be any funding or financial backing to actually implement them. I'm looking at what we've got here, and like Anna said, it's eventually going to come down to the ambitious plans that are part of this document are going to come down to whether the county's got money to pay for it, and there are a number of potential funding sources for the different kinds of things that are identified in here. That's nice to give a menu of options to eventual decision makers, but I'm wondering if there might be some way of expediting the consideration of them. And I know that makes things controversial. It raises issues of assessments and taxes and fees and other things that are, often politically unpopular. But eventually, if we're serious about this, I think those are going to have to be on the table. And I'm wondering if, as part of this process, we should try to move those conversations forward too.
yeah, definitely, heard some of that feedback, and so that's what I've been thinking about as far as the implementation plan. We also talked about, being really specific with the timetable. I like the idea of like the first 100 days idea of, a new president comes in and here's the first 100 days, and there's some immediate steps that need to be taken, and one of them could be related to the pursuit of different funding mechanisms and things like that. But I think what it also needs to address is we're going to come to you at some point with something to talk about, and being pretty explicit about that. But that's what I'm thinking about. Obviously, this is your plan, so that's the things I'm thinking about putting down on paper, and you guys can discuss. And I'd love for some enhancement of that from this group of what it should say, what it should look like. You've been doing this a long time in this community. You know what the hurdles are. You know what the things are that people are going to listen to. So how do we have those kind of conversations and kind of write it so it's going to stick? I'd be very anxious to hear those ideas. Not right now, but at some point.
If I could piggyback on that, I think it would be helpful if we could get an overview of the county solid waste programs that are currently in place, and at least a general sense of the funding that goes to the various components of the services that are funded right now, primarily through the Arbor Hills agreement, but any other sources that come to the county as well, on kind of what the priorities have been, what the dollar values have been for those services in the past. We have kind of an idea of what the current reality is in the way of county funding for related programs and services. And I'm wondering if it might also be possible to at least get an overview of what some of those alternate funding sources could be, and if it's legislation, what the primary elements, a paragraph or two that gives us at least a sense of how it works, what the function is, how the revenue is generated, what the decision-making process is, that sort of thing. I think that would be helpful to us as well, to kind of know going in what that might look like. The last thing I think that would be helpful, at least from my point of view, would be if RRS and the county can come in with some sense of, as part of the implementation plan, what are the kind of the key elements or even a suggested, at least initial organizational strategy. We see 5 major functions or 5 major issues that we want to address as part of the implementation plan, and at least a starter for us to consider what that might look like in the way of kind of operationally or organizationally. So we have a chance to review that and say, are we covering our bases and our interests as part of this implementation plan?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Are you looking at that for a January presentation? Because there was a presentation by county staff at a September meeting, I want to say. It doesn't matter either way, which highlighted some of the key programs. So
yes.
Maybe if I could just clarify, in the time, is maybe assigning some values. I understand what you're asking for funding.
Yes.
Would that be helpful?
That would be helpful. Yeah, so if you could pull that together at least by January, that'd be great.
We're going to have a report ready by February. We're still pulling in numbers for 2016, but we will have some preliminary numbers, but we'll have a final report for our February meeting for 2016 activities, what we spent our money on and how we receive revenue.
Well, we'll see what we can get together.
Okay, great. Yeah, appreciate that.
Sorry, go ahead.
Could I just clarify from what Ryan was saying? You've got all these great new ideas, but I don't want to lose where we've been. So when you're saying implementation, are we looking at continuing like the toxics program and the collection days and the advisory capacity that the county provides to all communities within the county?
Yep.
It's so much fun to look at new programs, but we don't want to lose the old one, and we want to make sure we're diversifying the funding to be able to maintain what we've already accomplished, but go further.
Yeah, no,
So that's
appreciate that, absolutely.
And I think also just identifying what those programs you mentioned cost.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, because kind of where do the dollars go, and what's being spent, and then so the committee can understand what additional needs to happen, and or how do you reprioritize if ever necessary. But we've got lots of feedback. We've got you guys, doing a SWOT analysis of where services stand. We've got public input of what things are important to them. So we have lots of pieces of what works and what they want better and what we all want better. So it's just, I think, reorganizing it into another way for this conversation. And then there's also, you should have already reviewed it. It is a list of costs, or I forgot the name of the section, but it is that paragraph description you're talking about,
Yes.
Brian, of funding mechanisms.
Okay.
It's in your current plan document, and really it hasn't changed because a lot of it's like,
Okay.
it's the
If
same
maybe you
old,
could just
same
even
old.
reference that.
I'll pull it out and send it separately,
Yeah,
just so
that'd be
it's easy to access, but that is in there, we have to include it as part of the plan. And I think it just needs to be updated, because I know the county put in a couple of suggestions of other things to consider,
Great,
so.
great. Anything else under the implementation plan? If not, are you good, Anna?
Yes?
Let's move on to new business, community updates. Anything at the county or state level that
I
should
was
be
gonna
noted?
mention the report, 2016
Yeah.
report, but we've already done that.
Yeah, great.
That'll be coming up. That's all I have.
Okay, anyone else? And then how about solid waste planning committee member, any updates? And I was just gonna note that John Ford has had to resign because of health issues. At this point, I don't think it would be productive to seek to replace that. It was an alternate position. We've got maybe a couple more months left. We'd basically just be getting the appointment at the time that presumably our work is largely completed. So we can deal with that, I guess, if we feel like it later, but at this point, not planning to refill that alternate position. So at this time, I'd like to open up, oh yes, please, Jack.
I did have, I was actually hoping I could tap Dave for an update, and I don't know whether it affects our current plan, but we have a listing of all the recycling facilities, the MRFs, whatever, in the current draft. And with the fire that occurred at the south end of Arbor Hills, the Arbor Hills MRF site, are there plans to rebuild? Should we leave that in? Should we take it out?
We still have the current permit to operate that facility, so I would leave it in your plan. I don't have an update from the operator about the current plans, when, if, my understanding is that it is going to be rebuilt, or it's gonna operate as a recycling facility. I just don't have an update about when, or what they're gonna do, how much more, how big, you know.
So at this point, leave it in.
Definitely leave it in, because it's part of, we saw the license, but I don't have an update to give you.
So as updates are available, assuming that happens in the next month or two, would be helpful to get that.
I would assume next 2 months.
Okay, so maybe towards the end of our planning process, we'll have a better idea of where that's headed.
Correct.
Great, appreciate that. Let's open up the second public comment period. This is general public comment unrelated to the current meeting agenda items. Same rules apply, 3 minutes, and if you could state who you are, that would be helpful as well. So, any comments from the public at this time?
I'm back again, but I listened to you closely tonight, and it's Marjorie Banner from Norfolk Township. I totally understand your need for a process, a siting process, for the less sensitive areas. I also think that from the gist of the conversation, that nobody could really disagree that the legislation from the 70s and 80s is out of date. And a need for a regional concept would be wonderful, and we are working on that from a legislative standpoint. But I do think you have it in your power to solve the issue that most of us are here for tonight. I think that Genesee County addressed it when they put in their plan that their facility had a maximum or a minimum capacity for 10 years. Yours does too. You have more than that. You have capacity with almost every county around you for miles and miles in diameter. You have plenty of capacity. So other than citing the non-sensitive things and a process for doing so, I think you could put in your plan a restriction on the size of the landfill at the 337 acres that exists right now, and no siting capacity, or no siting criteria for the one biggest, most sensitive issue, the landfill. And I think that would solve all the problems that have been brought to you in regard to this plan. I think it would be fair, and I think it would, as I said again, solve those problems.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Mariam Scaveras. I own a business in Saline. It's in Washtenaw County. I also live in Northville. We have about 200 employees, and we recycle everything in our business. And so we're proud of that. And we'll continue to do so. And we manufacture electronics, and we have a lot of waste that we throw, but it's all recycled. We have an issue, and I'm sensitive to everything I've heard tonight, and I know there are some of you who abhor any additional landfills because we're from Washtenaw County, want to recycle. But there are those who have an interest, and I don't understand how the committee ever got formed, but it is what it is. But I disagree with JD. Not everything's laid out in concrete. And I know I've heard the law, and I've read the law, and yeah, there's county boundaries, but you've got a school with 500 kids, 2,000 feet away, children, elementary school, that's been affected. You've just seen an explosion and a fire, and yet we are subjected to this constant buildup of a landfill. I say you've got power somewhere to be able to make those changes, if not for the houses and everybody's doing this as far as who's to blame. But it is what it is. We've got 500 kids, elementary, 2,000 feet away from this monstrosity that blew up here about a month ago. So I ask you if you can please figure out a way, even though it's in the law somehow, to break down this barrier and put in this limit, whether it's in Washtenaw County or Wayne County, that if there's a school around, it's got to be further away. Thank you.
Fred Chayco from Northville Township. As long as we're hearing some numbers, we had our assessor do a little study, and in the 4 square miles immediately to the east of Arbor Hills, that's 25% of our taxable value in our entire township. So if that value suffers, then our entire township will end up suffering financially.
Hello, I'm Ben Baucom, Northville. I live on Napier. I think a lot of the points here are great. I have a different request tonight after seeing the flow chart. I ask that when you review the text that comes out in the process for going through this, that you read it as if you were a different committee, right? The next committee or the committee after that, because the rules that you set with this process will be for them, and they will not have the same experience that you have with us and with everybody else that's come and talked to you. Breaking out subcommittees generally causes a lack of transparency, confusion about how things work, and it makes people nervous about the recommendations that come out of those subcommittees, because you as a committee would get a recommendation from a smaller group, and you're not going to have all the knowledge that group had. You wouldn't go through what that group had, and it's a way of tilting a ship. So just think through that as you read through this process over the next few months. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dave Horan. I live in Northville Township. This is my third meeting I've come to. And in the past, I've mentioned concerns like most people, that the odors and the traffic and sort of like unknown risks to health. But I was kind of surprised, and I had a big thing I was going to bring. I had handouts, but anyways, I forgot it. But I was surprised when I read the EPA's violations at the Arbor Hills facility to 2 different companies. where, and like I said, I had to bring it up on the internet, where when they talked about, this is Arbor Hills landfill, the environmental impacts of violation, and it says, and I'm quoting here from the EPA, hazardous air pollutant emissions can lead to adverse health conditions, health effects like cancer, respiratory irritation, and damage to the nervous system. So, of course, when I read that, I was very concerned, because I have a family, and I know a lot of my neighbors have a family. So, and I don't know if the people who, your predecessors who approved this initial landfill, did they think that their actions could potentially lead to people getting cancer or other illnesses? I don't know. But I just want to make sure that everybody here realizes that these odors aren't just ruining a party kind of thing. It can cause serious health effects, according to the EPA. And I got this off the EPA site. There's a link to it on the Stop Arbor Hills website as well. But this is real serious stuff to the people who live there. I mean, no one wants to get cancer. No one wants their child to get cancer. So please be sensitive to that when you make decisions about expanding the landfill or even letting it continue to operate. Because to be honest, when I read that, I was like, we got to shut this thing down until they can resolve these issues with the odors. And this, it's not just the odors. Every time I breathe the odor, I think, oh my gosh, is this causing harm to my health? And then I wonder, what about the days I don't smell the odors, but maybe it's still causing harm to my health? So anyways, I just want to make sure that you were all aware of that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Matt Weaver. I'm a Northville resident. I just wanted to make a comment about the consultant who mentioned the reason that you can't have input from other municipalities is because nothing would ever get cited. And I apologize, I don't have the numbers. I think we do. Most landfills are not cited right on county lines. Most, if you look throughout the state of Michigan, most are cited within communities or within a county. So it's not a fact that you could never get something cited if you took the input of other municipalities. I just didn't think it was a very accurate statement that he made, and I just wanted to counter that a little bit. So I just take that into account that there are lots that, and Wayne County did it too, right? If you look what was cited right on the edge of Wayne County and Washtenaw 50 years ago, it was sort of a county norm to put things you didn't want right on your neighbor's doorstep, but maybe it's time to look at it regionally and say it's probably okay to take the input of the surrounding communities. Thank you.
Hey everyone, my name is Jason Demina. I live in Northville. I'm a clinician at the Carmenos Cancer Center in Detroit. Ironically, this is my fourth Washtenaw Township Solid Waste meeting after moving out of Washtenaw in February of this year to Northville. I'm fortunate. Where I live in Steeplechase, we only smell the odor a couple times, but a few weeks ago I was driving down Beck Road and actually through my car, the odor was in my nose and it was actually burning my nose and giving me a headache, and it wasn't until I got much further down 96 that it actually subsided. And I was like, this is real, this can cause issues. I think it's contrary to your mission to allow for an expansion to happen. I think that's evident. I think the capacity issue is evident. I would appreciate, and I think we all would, that the siting criteria be eliminated because, as a young father, I have two young kids at home. They're 3 and they're 1. I'm not going to see them today. My wife's been with them all day, putting them to bed. I will keep coming to these meetings, though I think a lot of our time would be better spent doing things like me reading to my kids, putting them to bed. But this is important. This is for them. I just don't think we want to deal with this in perpetuity, coming to these monthly, when I think it's obvious that any expansion really shouldn't exist. So it'd be nice to at least buy us a few years of calm instead of just having to deal with this month after month for years on end. So I appreciate your time, appreciate you, I don't know if you provided the food, that's very nice that came from you. Please think of us, think of all of our children. It's sad as a doctor who works at a cancer center knowing that I'm putting my kids at increased risk because of where we live. And I think a lot of us don't really have the option to just get up and move. It's not that easy. Please think of them and think of all of us, and thank you for your time. And have a nice holiday. Thank you.
Roland Wong, Secretary of the Northville School Board. And at the last meeting, there was mention of the possibility of a task force or advisory committee or board or whatever. And since then, I've broached the subject with Mary Kay Gallagher, who is the superintendent of schools for Northville. And so, she is very interested in that process, whether it would be her or Mike Zoff, who is the assistant superintendent for facilities, who would be involved if and when that advisory committee becomes, a reality. So I just wanted to let you know of that process, that the Northville School District is engaged and interested in that process. So, and by the way, Northville School District includes a slice of Salem Township, and there are Washtenaw County students that are affected by this. So, thank you.
Anyone else who would like to speak at this public comment? Seeing no one, just would note that our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, January 11th, 5:30 p.m. Right now, it is scheduled at the Western Washtenaw County Service Center right next door in the basement conference room where we've been in the past. We'll assess that, I think, in light of accessibility and size of the audience that we might expect. But for now, that is where the meeting is scheduled for January 11th.